Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining me at the market site in Times Square, New York City, we have Fred Schonenberg. He's the CEO of VentureFuel. We're going to take a look at implementing new technologies to drive measurable growth. It's great to have you with us at market site, Fred. And the catalyst for company innovation, you have to continue to fuel that spend, fuel that growth.
Yeah. We spend a lot of time building programs for large corporations to work with emerging startups. So kind of taking the larger companies, finding the new tech that's coming and marrying those two together. So it's always super interesting to see those two worlds, the established players and what's coming next, and bring them.
Yeah, I mean, you've worked with Netflix, Bravo, Chanel, driven millions to startups. It's really interesting that they're looking to do that organically versus having to go out there and acquire a company.
Yeah, I mean, the big difference is I think a big trend happening is that large corporations want to partner first before making an acquisition. I think rolling in an acquisition is very challenging, it's very costly. Whereas if they can work with a startup and kind of take advantage of the blue flame thinking of an entrepreneur, that can then, they can test a bunch of different cases, see what's going to move the needle for them before getting into a longer term partnership.
I mean, these newer companies, Netflix, for example, they were startups at one point.
Yeah.
So I guess it's interesting to see if they've retained any of that mentality or if it's just a way to refresh their thinking, because, I mean, they're a huge global brand now.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, every company was a startup at one point, right? And it goes generationally. But what's really interesting is companies get large because they're really good at doing one thing. They build for the business that is today. The building for what's tomorrow's business is harder. They have legacy systems. They have all these different things that sort of slow them down. And so they're never going to win the race to what's next because the startup is unencumbered by legacy systems or anything like that. So they get to move a little faster. So by bringing them together, you get sort of the best of both worlds to unlock potential for both of them.
So I would imagine some of the newer technologies that you're looking at, AI, machine learning, big data analytics, and so forth.
Yeah, a lot of that. We get into some pretty interesting things as well on like haptics, thinking through touch technologies that are there. Right now we're really excited about something called synthetic media. This sort of deep fakes is what people talk a lot about, but there's also some pretty interesting positive uses for it. Thinking through the ability to take your own image and putting it into GIFs, for instance, which has a lot from a consumer standpoint. That can be really interesting to drive scale and some authenticity, kind of put the consumer in the heart of the message.
As long as we're not taking over the jobs of reporters.
No, never,
Sometimes
never.
I see that, and that's kind of weird to see.
That part's not working.
But so let's talk about VentureFuel and the company itself. You actually don't take equity in the startup, and you're 100% independent. That sounds a little bit different than the traditional model.
Yeah, our belief was the only way to be unbiased is to not take equity in the startups. If you ask me for my opinion of 10 different startups, I'm going to tell you the one that I put money into, no matter what's the best option. So despite the temptation to sort of get in on the early ground, we thought that our obligation was to work for the corporation, be an extension of their team. And so what we do is we go out and source sort of what's next, act as a VC, but we're working entirely for the corporation and whatever their business problem is. So that way we can be completely agnostic, unbiased, and deliver a solution that solves for whatever the immediate business issue is.
All right, let's get your 2020 outlook here. What does the VC market look like?
It's going to continue to grow. I think what's very interesting is the trend is going to move from blitz scaling, this idea of grow at all costs, don't worry about the business model, let's just get as much market share as we can and sort of build it and they will come. It's going to flip over to more traditional business. Like what is the business plan? Can you be profitable? We think that's great for what we do in the fact that, companies are going to be looking to make a profit and drive revenue rather than, hey, we'll spend at all costs. We need to attract the best talent, so we're going to spend millions of dollars on a ping pong table.
I think 2019 was a great lesson in that, for sure. I mean, there was a number of companies that we could cite here, not only for the investing public, not getting stuck holding the bag, if you will, but to, telling a great story is one thing, but actually having an underlying business model and ways to drive earnings and drive revenue. It's encouraging to hear you say that's going to matter in 2020.
I think it is, and I think what's interesting, what you described is like marketing at its core. It's brand building, but that in the past was always on top of a great business model. I think we kind of put the cart before the horse a little bit, where it was all about building a brand and not worrying about, is this delivering value, is it delivering revenue, is there a real business model that can scale? And then on top of that, what is your purpose, what is your core, what is the brand message? So I think we're going to get back to basics a little bit from there.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. Thanks so much for joining us at MarketSite.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining me on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.